When I was in 6th grade, I started writing a book series about a few countries in an alternate world. Basically, it's basically Earth, but there's a bunch of small islands, actually rather large islands, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean who are always at war with each other. And it was absolute craziness. And I'm going to show you the first book that I made in this series. So, right here is a map of all the countries. And let's get into it. So there was a man named Oleg Gorsha, and this is the ancient times, by the way. I'm talking like 6 BC. So this guy, he's like middle-aged around, and he wanted to have a country of his own. But the islands I was telling you about just got discovered, and he was interested in going and founding a country there. He was from around Germany, Austria, like around that area. And he eventually sailed there and started the nation of, city state of Hopestad, while his brother, who's rather on the wild side, started the city state of Statderwellen right above him. Now I'm going to show you a map. So the yellow is the city state of Statderwellen, and the brown is the city state of Hopestad. Now we'll talk about Hopestad. In Hopestad, houses were built out of wood. By the way, all these pictures are AI made because I need to make them very specific. So, also they bartered for supplies. Now, bartering is like trading at lunch. So say, I'll have a bag of Takis for your fries, Like, it's not using real money, but you're like trading, like, things. You get what I'm saying? It's just imagine lunch, trading Takis for chips, basically. In Hopestad, people wrote in an ancient language called cuneiform, and rich people hired people to teach them and their children how to write. You see, learning how to write back then really showed that you were really smart and really rich because you had to hire people to teach you how to write. And there was people who would get hired for that because they learned from other people who were hired. So it's kind of like this endless circle of process. But yeah, only rich people knew how to write and read. In Hopestad, women can own businesses and land, and all crimes are punishable by death. In Hopestad, they were known for their weaponsmith. They made very good weapons. And they had a huge building that stored records and stone tablets. The Hopestad really wanted to keep record of everything that went on. So Statderwellen, let's talk about them. So in Statderwellen, they lived next to the ocean, so they had a lot of fishing, but they're also rich from all the resources they sold in the market. They had a lot of resources, especially gold. They also had the first established military in Calabria. Here's what their soldiers would have looked like: leather armor, red tunic, and kind of an iron, sometimes copper helmet. Usually they had swords. So here's what kind of little area would be. So Statderwellen, they had a lot of good farming too because they were next to the water. And everyone knows from Minecraft that always plants grow better next to water. So all their houses were built out of stone bricks that they layered on top of each other. And the people there were usually pretty civilized, unlike their leader, Kamek, who wasn't really. And pretty much, yeah, they also were a fan of walls, just like Donald Trump. So, after all this, Statderwellen and Hopestad sent out explorers to explore the rest of the island of Calabria. They eventually found what would be the city-state of Westenstad, and they made a fort called Festung de West. I'm not sure if I'm making that right. Let me show you the map. But yeah, here it is. This is what ends up being the borders of each city-state. Now, Festung de West was a little, kind of like a little fort for explorers and military people. But yeah, here's the map. And each city-state had their own ruler, as you'll see. But yeah, here we go for the next chapter, when it gets really tense. So in Westenstad, the land was rather bare, so they used to import stuff from other countries or buy and trade with all the other city-states in their vicinity. Also, their leader was Goggith. He was from ancient Britain and sailed all the way down here to own Westenstad. Now, he was pretty crazy and pretty psychotic. He murdered people for fun. But yeah, this is Goggith. He was rich. He had the biggest palace in all of Calabria, unlike his citizens. And his house was made of gold. Like I was saying earlier, Festung de West was a huge castle slash fort. People sometimes lived in it, but usually disease swept through there and it made it pretty crazy. Pretty hard to live in. But yeah, this place was usually pretty bare too, but it was held until the late 1800s. That's how good of a fort it was. So yeah, now we're gonna get into what started the actual war. But first, let me talk to you about who owns it and who used to be one of Goggith's greatest generals, Dieter Aachen. He also made this fort. That's him in the picture. And yeah, now let's get into the war. Then, they had a meeting. All right, so all the city-states have a meeting. And Goggith was pretty upset because Oleg Gorsha wanted to make rules for... He wanted all the city-states to follow his rules that he had for Hopestad, where all crimes are punishable by death. Everyone was okay with this except Westenstad and Festung de West. So Dieter Aachen and Goggith were not okay with this. So they eventually talked to each other and decided this is going to be pretty crazy. But then again, the people that we're talking about are already pretty crazy. They decided to declare war on the rest of the nations who signed that treaty. And all the nations who signed that treaty joined together to form the Calabian Empire. And all the nations that Goggith and Dieter Aachen were a part of was turned into the Gog states. So pretty much Westenstad and Festung de West become the Gog states. And the other city-states become the Calabian Empire. But this little picture here is the Stadterwellen Wall, which I was telling you, they're just like Donald Trump, and they like to build walls. Goggith was scared. Sorry. Kamek Gorsha was scared, so he built that wall in Stadterwellen. So yeah, so Westenstad began to raid small villages in Sudlandern. Here's what those battles would have looked like. They just beat them up, pretty much, stole all their food and stuff. Pretty average ancient warfare stuff. Just go around raiding small villages and stealing their stuff. After that, we're going to get into the first major battle, which is when Goggith sent his hugest army to go up into Stadterwellen and give him a big beating. So the first battle we're going to talk about is the Battle of the Border. So, once we get to this picture, Goggith and his troops, including a bunch of chariots, were ready to charge on this Calabian camp. He was going to wait until nighttime, but he was very impatient, so he's like, you know what, let's just kill him now. So he organized his army. This is his army right in this picture, right here, and decided to get some war. So they slowly marched towards the Calabian camp, but then the Calabians noticed them and charged back. And right in the next picture, this is the Gog soldiers establishing a phalanx maneuver that Goggith was famous for, where a bunch of people with shields and spears stick together, so if you run at them, you get stabbed. So, eventually, he got to Tinter Bridge, passed it, and 3 miles later, he set up camp. So, Goggith had already done well in the battle for the border, and now he set up camp next to a river. So, he was enjoying himself next to the river. When nightfall came, a bunch of archers from Stadterwellen, the Calabian Empire, decided to start shooting arrows at the camp. And the arrows had fire. They were flaming arrows, so that burned up the place. Then both sides engaged in melee combat, and it was pretty bloody. This would end up being the bloodiest battle in the entire war, as they fought on that little bridge. Eventually, believe it or not, the Calabian Empire pushed them back. This is Synth Baker, a writer in Wessenstad who eventually wrote a book, and most of the accounts we have in the lore of this Calabian series of books. But yeah, he even created a religion called Bedugism. I know it sounds weird, but that's what it was. And in this religion, there were 12 supreme beings, and they were known as the Shmishmith. Okay, it sounds weird, but whatever. And according to Bedugism, when you died, you lived with these 12 beings no matter what, unless you broke one of their 3 rules. They had 12 gods: Nessus, Nithrith, Joknil, Malala, Jinth, Helix, Sornik, Zokarith, Hekarinth, and Shetipuff. Shetipuff was the most significant. He ruled over all of the other gods. And yeah, according to Bedugism. And even Synth Baker established a group of assassins called the Shetnik, who would assassinate anybody who broke these 3 rules. You have to do this every day. You have to worship people. You have to worship all 12 of the gods every day. And you cannot hurt a poor person in a temple in a Betugism, or whatever I said before, temple. So pretty much, it's a very oddly specific rules, but worship all the gods all the time, and pretty much you'll be fine. You won't get assassinated. Sounds like a good religion to believe in, if I don't say so myself. I'm being sarcastic. So, in Sudlander, there's a fort named Fort Pornelio. So, Goggith was going to launch an attack there. He believed, this is why he wanted to attack, is because Goggith believed they would finish off the war's southern front in Sudlander. It was a very well-built fort that he can use against the Calabian Empire, and he was low on supplies, and the fort had plenty of supplies inside. So what would you do? You charged in and beat them up. Well, he did it differently. He had a small force in the middle. This is some soldiers ready to charge on the fort. Now, in this picture, you see, instead of charging one area with a large force, he had a bunch of small forces charge in a bunch of different areas to get some confusion in there. Pretty good strategy, and eventually he took the fort and secured the supplies he needed. Now, Dieter believed in this Betugism weird religion thing, and he prayed every day until one day he got so drunk he forgot to. So guess what? He got a little bit stabbed. This is a picture of him getting stabbed. Of course, the AI sucks, so there's modern life people in the background, but he just got stabbed. And yeah. So let's talk about the Shetnik. The Shetnik were a religious extremist religious group in Calabia who assassinated people who did not follow the rules of the belief of Betugism. And yes, all of their weapons they had were marked with an S for Shetnik. And yeah, pretty crazy dudes. And trust me, they would not leave. They would make sure they get work done. But yeah, so this is Festsong the West. After Dieter died, Festung the West was in turmoil because guess what? Their leader just died. Also, a lot of civilians were getting drunk because of national holidays and stuff. And guess what? They got assassinated. So, if all the assassinations and all the people not believing in Betugism, so they stopped believing, which led to more assassinations. So, it was absolute turmoil. And this fort eventually got abandoned. And pretty much hundreds of people died just because of not believing in this religion and because one guy died. So, it got pretty chaotic. So, after that, they sent out scouts into the ocean and found two islands, the Tri Islands and Tonishma. The Tri Islands had natives who lived there before the Calabians came, and they befriended the natives. And Tonishma was not inhabited, but it had lots of good raw resources that Calabia could use. So then Westenstad started many small skirmishes against Sudlander, and the war went on, but it became apparent that Festung the West and Westenstad, aka the Gog states, would lose against the Calabian Empire, the rest of the city states. So the war on Gogith lasted from 4 BC to 2 BC, which is 2 years. And it ended this year at 2 BC. And Synth Baker was assassinated by Shetnik, who tried to overthrow him. In fact, they tried to overthrow the entirety of the Gog state's government. I mean, they had the power, so why not? And then, one day, our big crazy dude, Gogith, was wandering around a temple. He still believed in Betugism, crazy. And he continued believing, and guess what? He stabbed someone, and it happened to be Poor at a temple because he was being annoying, the poor guy. So he did what anyone do, and he got assassinated. The Calabian Empire took over the Gog states. And yeah, here we are. Now, all of Calabia was unified because all the other city-states joined together, including Westenstad and Festung the West. So now that Calabia was unified, Oleg Gorsha, the leader of Hopestad, was eventually emperor of all of Calabia, unifying everything. Isn't that great? Now, after unified, he led for until 40 AD, which is quite a while. He got pretty old. His advisor, Casper, eventually led. He was Christian and pretty smart and liked military strategy. So, yeah, here we are, and I guess I'll see you in the next book where the story is continued when all of the sudden Calabia's neighbor, Helechia, attacks.